All across ocean and land, incumbent on all men, is the pilgrimage to Mecca, fifth pillar of Islam, in the footsteps of Muhammad, the last prophet of Allah.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to Hajj Demystified, explaining the wisdom behind the acts of Hajj so that our acts of worship are complete and perfect, so that our acts of worship are not just physical actions or goals in itself, but the goal is to have the fear of Allah, to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to change our life, to have this spiritual healing, if it's correct to say that, to purify ourselves, and that's the goal of the ibadah. It transforms the human being to be the perfect human being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. Perfect not in the sense that a person becomes sinless, but rather to be perfect in the state of Iman, to complete one's Iman and faith, to understand the perfect purpose of one's life, to always repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be patient with the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout our entire life. We see many times that when people go for Hajj and they go back to their countries, and maybe they're affected for a few days or a few weeks or a few months after Hajj, and then after that things go back again to the way it was before Hajj. Or some people, they even immediately after they return, they indulge into sins and forgetfulness. And they think that their duty is to perform Hajj as a pillar of Islam, and they're satisfied with this. And then they go back and they live their life away from the deen of Islam, committing sins and so on. And people are, of course, are in levels of this. Some people, they don't perform Hajj whatsoever, and this is such an evil way. And some people, they perform Hajj, but they just do it as a duty, as some physical actions, without the intentions to change one's life whatsoever, without repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from what is evil. And some people, they have the sincere intentions, but then they don't work on themselves in the right way so that they would not repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the most perfect way. And then we have the perfect believers, in which they would go sincerely and truthfully, and they have the strong intention to change their lives, and they would take the means afterwards to be steadfast on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would help them by His mercy and His will subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what we need to focus on, to heal ourselves from the diseases of our hearts, and to take this lesson from the journey of Hajj. The journey of Hajj, for those who do it right, they would find it physically challenging. And that means when a person, as if this whole oneself is like a mountain, and for you to be able to purify oneself and to go over and to be in control of oneself, we all want to be away from sins. We all wish to be this righteous individual that is pleased with the deen of Islam, pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Matters of obedience to Allah is made easy for us. But there is a level or a time of struggle that we have to overcome before we get to this level of having this an-nafsul mutma'innah, to have this tranquil nafs, that a person would be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with ease and not too much struggle with oneself. And every time a person is steadfast, he would deviate from the path. A person wants to reach a level where he's content and happy. But then we have to cross this level of struggle with oneself. In the journey of Hajj, a big portion of that is being done. Physically challenging oneself with the struggle and the patience and so on, while the heart is working, as it's mentioned previously in the previous episodes, to look into the wisdom of these actions and to seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what is left is easier than what happened during the days of Hajj. Now towards the end of Hajj, how can a person go back to his home, to his town, to his country with a different lifestyle, to be steadfast on the deen of Allah? This is supposed to be something easier for the person that did Hajj in the most perfect way. But we need to be steadfast. We need to heal ourselves by repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to keep our Hajj firm and sound. By taking the means when it's easy for the person, when he's in Hajj and he feels the souls are purified, that the person will make decisions then, that he won't go back to the sins anymore. If he had wealth that is from haram, that if he indulged into some haram transactions, he would repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sacrifice is big, let it be big, it's okay. As long as it's haram, a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give him more in return. And to have the sincerity and the reliance and the certainty in the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If a person was not making salah in the masjid, for example, now the decision is made for him to go to make salah in the masjid. If a person is not kind to his neighbors or kind to his relatives, he will be kind to them. Any disputes, all of that will be relieved from, although he didn't, even if he didn't do that before he go for Hajj, and so on. Purifying oneself, making the salah on time, reciting Quran, repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from major and minor sins. These are the duty and these are the effect of one's Hajj if it's accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The early generations of Islam, whenever they would do an act of worship, towards the end of it, it would concern them so much, would that deed be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? And the more the person put an effort in something, the more he wants to preserve it and to keep it and not to lose it. And that's why they say when a person earns wealth, he's more careful with his spending. Different than someone inherited wealth. He would spend it in a very foolish way. So the same thing when a person Hajj earned his actions by the will of Allah, if it's correct to say that, with the effort and wealth being spent and health and so on, then he wants to keep this iman and the level of al-iman and not to lose and to waste what he did in the Hajj. So when this concern is present in the heart, this is a great favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the person. And then the matter becomes easy when the person would seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be steadfast. What is meant is al-istiqamah, to be steadfast on the deen of Islam. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. One of the great acts of worship that we've been talking about throughout these episodes is to reflect, to think, not just to do things physically, but to think. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants that from us. And I mentioned in the Quran, many verses in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from the believers to think. The last 10 verses of Surah Al-Imran, when it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَيْلٌ لِمَنْ قَرَأَهَا فَلَمْ يَتَدَبَّرْ مَا فِيهَا. Woe to the one that recites them and that does not reflect upon these verses. And in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, till the end of the ayat. That the people of wisdom, the people of intellect, they are the ones that reflect and think about the ayat and the signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They make remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sitting and standing and laying down, and they reflect upon the ayat of Allah till the end of the verses. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised them because they think. Abu Darda radiallahu anhu, his wife Darda, she was asked about what was the most important ibadah to Abu Darda. Although he was someone that would pray and pray at night and give zakah and so on, she said his most important ibadah was at-tafakkur, to reflect. And as Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said that at-tafakkur, to reflect and to think, is aslul khayri wa shar, is the root of good and evil. When a person would think and make decisions. So now, during Hajj, at the end of time of Hajj, a person needs to think, to make decisions, to be steadfast on what is good, and to be firm, and to seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to take the reflection upon this life that we live in, that life is limited. Death comes at no time whatsoever. And how would a person choose this limited life against the everlasting life and joy in the hereafter? The wise person would never do that. And that's why Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, he said, فَكَّرْتُ فِي الدُّنْيَا فَاعْتَبَرْتُ مِنْهَا بِهَا, which means I reflected upon this world that I'm living in. And I took the lesson from it so that I would live in it with these lessons as a result of the reflection, as a result of pondering and reflecting upon this dunya. And one of the things that he said, that مَا تَكَادُ شَهَوَاتُهَا تَنْقَضِي, that almost whenever the desire, a person would fulfill his desire, then the marara or the bitterness of it comes right after that. So why long so much for this worldly gain when it's something that would never be for everlasting joy? That what a person needs to be attached to is the hereafter. And this comes with reflecting, thinking about the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thinking about the path to take us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thinking about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared for the believers in the Day of Judgment, and thinking about the shaitan and how to avoid the path to be obedient to shaitan, and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared for the disbelievers and the sinners and so on in the Day of Judgment. When a person thinks this way and being helped to apply the orders of Allah in Hajj, then the matter becomes easy for the person to do what is good and to stay away from what is evil, and to have this constant reminder to oneself, so that the person is not just living a life of foolishness, a life of forgetfulness like the cattles and so on. This is how the life of the disbelievers are. They just follow their desires, and a desire after a desire. They don't have any self-discipline to their own selves. They don't purify their souls according to the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about them, إِنْهُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. They are nothing but cattles. Like the cattles, they are even worse, more deviant than the cattles. So for us to purify ourselves and to go back to our localities and to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to really reflect upon this, to reflect upon this journey. Even if a person didn't go for Hajj or went for Hajj a long time ago, reflect upon these duties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the believers, so that that can change our life, so that we become more obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and more self-restraint and having responsibilities and taking actions, and to be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by saying, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. That be patient, make yourself patient to be with those who invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are righteous. Going back to our localities, and you would find people that are righteous and not righteous. In Hajj, everybody was doing the acts of worship. But then when people go back, they would find all types of people. The order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes, be patient with those who invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship Allah. Where would you find them? In the masajid. The masajid, those who are following the sunnah the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Be with them, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to raise our families and children in such a way. These are the means of steadfastness till the moment of death. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from the journey of Hajj, from the blessed days of the Hijjah, and to bless our life to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala till the moment of death. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
All across ocean and land, incumbent on all men, is the pilgrimage to Mecca, fifth pillar of Islam, in the footsteps of Muhammad, the last prophet of Allah.